The artifact had no business still being there. The Virex plane was picked clean decades ago, stripped by prospectors, surveyed by corporations, and finally abandoned when nothing valuable remained. Yet every satellite pass still flagged the same anomaly in the same coordinates. Not active, not dangerous, just persistent. It lay half-buried beneath the rust-red soil, an oblong mass of dark material that reflected light wrong, as if the sun hesitated before touching it. Wind couldn't erode it. Scanners couldn't classify it, and no one could remember when it had first appeared, only that it had always been there. Calder Ryn stopped his crawler when he saw in person. He cut the engine and listened to the wind whistle across the plain. The artifact didn't hum, didn't glow, didn't react, but Calder felt it watching. Most people called it dead tech. Calder had made a living proving that dead things just hadn't been listened to properly. He stepped closer, boots crunching against soil that hadn't moved in years. Up close, the surface wasn't stone or metal. It was something in between, threaded with faint fractures like healed wounds. Calder rested his palm against it. The artifact pulsed once. Not with energy, with recognition. Calder pulled his hand back, heart hammering. His scanner remained flatlined. No power, no signal, yet the ground beneath his feet vibrated, just enough to be real. That was when Calder smiled. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're not broken. You're just waiting." It was something far older, and Calder had just woken it up. If you enjoy slow-burn sci-fi about abandoned alien technology, forgotten mysteries, and humans restoring what the galaxy ignores, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this one continue every day. Calder didn't touch the artifact again. Not right away. Experience had taught him that the second contact mattered more than the first. The first was instinct. The second was intent. Whatever this thing was, it had responded once. That meant it could respond again, and Calder wanted to understand how before he asked why. He set up a temporary perimeter, deploying sensor stakes in a wide arc. Each one reported the same thing. Nothing. No radiation. No emissions. No quantum bleed. By every known standard, the object was inert. Yet the air felt heavier near it, as if distance behaved differently around its surface. Calder circled slowly. The fractures he'd noticed before weren't damage. They were seams, deliberate interruptions in a structure that had been designed to bend rather than break. Dust collected in them, but never penetrated deeper. Self-sealing, Calder muttered, or self-healing. He activated a low-frequency resonance tapper and placed it against the ground nearby, not touching the artifact, just close enough to listen for sympathetic vibration. The device chirped, then went quiet. Then the artifact responded, not with sound, but with rhythm. The soil beneath Calder's boots pulsed in a repeating pattern, too structured to be natural. Not a signal, not a broadcast, a question. Calder swallowed. He adjusted the tapper's output, shifting phase and tempo, answering instinctively rather than analytically. The artifact pulsed again, stronger this time. Something inside it moved. Not physically, conceptually. Calder felt it then, not in his hands or ears, but behind his eyes. A pressure, like a thought trying to remember how to be a thought. "This isn't a machine," he whispered. The artifact wasn't powering up. It was waking up. And whatever intelligence lay dormant inside, it didn't speak in language, symbols, or math. It spoke in repair. Calder stayed with the artifact through the night. Virex's sun dipped low, painting the plain in long amber shadows, but the object didn't cool the way stone should. It held its temperature steady and deliberate, as if maintaining an internal balance it refused to surrender. Calder set up camp nearby, running passive diagnostics while pretending not to watch it. The pulses continued, slow, rhythmic, patient. They weren't random. He began mapping them, not as signals, but as relationships. Duration to intensity. Pause to response. When he shifted his position, the rhythm adjusted. When he shut down one sensor, the artifact compensated by increasing ground vibration. It wasn't trying to communicate. It was trying to align. At dawn, Calder risked a controlled interface. He assembled a resonance frame from scrap alloy, and placed it a meter from the artifact surface. The moment he powered it on, the pulses synchronized. The frame glowed faintly. Inside Calder's mind, something unfolded. Not images, but impressions layered atop one another. Fast distances, slow construction, long purpose, then loss. The artifact recoiled, not physically, but in intent. The pulses fractured. The ground went still. Calder dropped to one knee, breath sharp. "I'm sorry," he said without knowing why. The response came immediately. Not anger, relief. The artifact projected a structure through the resonance frame. A shifting, incomplete geometry that felt like a memory stripped of context. Not a blueprint, not a map, a self-image. It wasn't broken because it was damaged. It was broken because it was alone. Calder understood then why no one else had triggered it. Scanners searched for energy. Corporations searched for function. This thing responded to attention. And Calder, for better or worse, had just proven he was paying it. Calder's first mistake was assuming restoration meant repair. There were no cracked conduits to replace, no burnt circuits to reroute. Every time he tried to impose a conventional fix, introducing power, stabilizing resonance, reinforcing seams, the artifact resisted. Not violently, gently, like a body rejecting an organ it didn't recognize. So Calder changed tactics. He stopped trying to fix it. Instead, he started listening for what it was missing. The pulses had grown uneven, like a heartbeat compensating for stress. Calder adjusted the resonance frame, not to amplify the signal, but to mirror it. When the artifact faltered, the frame echoed the weakness back, acknowledging it rather than correcting it. The response was immediate. The pulses stabilized. Inside the artifact, something loosened. Calder spent hours calibrating feedback loops, matching frequency with frequency, intention with intention. It felt less like engineering and more like tuning an instrument that had forgotten its own scale. At one point, Calder slipped and sent a surge too strong through the frame. The artifact shuddered. The pulses collapsed. Calder froze. No, my fault. He powered everything down and waited. Minutes passed. Then the pulses returned, tentative, cautious. Not angry. Testing him. Calder laughed softly. "You're learning too, aren't you?" The artifact responded with a new pattern, one he hadn't seen before. It wasn't a question this time. It was an offer. Calder adjusted the frame to accept it. The artifact shared a fragment of intent, continuation. Not survival, not dominance. Persistence through understanding. Calder felt a chill run through him. This wasn't an ancient weapon, or a database, or a forgotten engine. It was a system designed to preserve knowledge by becoming comprehensible. And someone long ago had left it here unfinished. Calder didn't need scanners to feel the shift. The artifact's presence had changed. Not stronger, not louder, but closer. Like a conversation that no longer required raised voices. He sat cross-legged in the dust, tools forgotten, as the resonance frame displayed a new projection. Not geometry this time. A sequence. Events, not images. The artifact had not been abandoned by accident. It had been placed. Long ago, an intelligence, or a collective of them, had built the artifact as a stabilizer. Not for energy or territory, but for continuity. When civilizations fractured, when records were lost, this object would listen, learn, and rebuild understanding through interaction. But something had gone wrong. The creators had tried to accelerate it. They forced structure onto something meant to adapt. The artifact resisted, not with rebellion, but refusal. So they buried it, not destroyed, not decommissioned, left to wait until someone approached it without command or expectation. Calder felt a tightness in his chest. "You weren't hiding," he whispered. "You were filtering." The artifact pulsed, steady calm. Its creators had never returned. Civilizations rose and fell above it, never realizing what lay beneath their feet because they asked the wrong questions. Calder realized the danger then. If corporations learned what this thing truly was, they'd rip it apart trying to extract answers. If governments found it, they'd lock it behind treaties and fear. Restoring it didn't mean activating it. It meant protecting its purpose. Calder began packing up his perimeter sensors. Not to leave, but to stay longer. To slow the process. To do it right. All right, he said quietly. We'll do this properly. The artifact responded with a pattern so gentle it almost felt like gratitude. Calder should have known the quiet wouldn't last. On the third day, his long-range passive array registered a distortion above the plane. Not a ship, not a jump signature, but the telltale flicker of a deep survey scan. Someone, somewhere, had finally noticed the anomaly changing state. He shut down the array immediately, but it was already too late. The artifact felt it too. Its pulses tightened, rhythm sharpening like a held breath. It's okay, Calder said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. We're still in control of the pace. The resonance frame flickered as the artifact adjusted, not to hide, but to constrain. Its presence folded inward, becoming quieter in ways Calder hadn't thought possible. The ground stopped vibrating. The air lightened, camouflage through restraint. Calder's comm crackled to life. Unregistered operator, a calm voice said. Corporate, professional, you're operating within a flag survey zone. Power down and identify yourself. Calder didn't answer. He severed the comm feed and began dismantling the resonance frame by hand, careful not to break the alignment they built. Each component removal felt like easing pressure off a wound. The artifact projected a warning, time reduced. I know, Calder muttered. I know. He worked faster, sweat streaking dust across his arms. Above the plane, a distant shimmer suggested a high-altitude drone passing overhead, blind to what lay beneath, but curious enough to keep circling. The artifact sent one more sequence, urgent, incomplete. A request. Calder froze. You want me to what? The meaning resolved slowly, like a thought learning how to be spoken. It didn't want Calder to hide it. It wanted Calder to finish it. Not fully, not perfectly, just enough that it could persist without him. Calder looked up at the empty sky, then back at the dark shape in the soil. All right, he said quietly. One last push. The pulses steadied. The artifact was ready to stand on its own, for the first time in its long, patient existence. Calder had always believed restoration meant permanence. Fix the thing. Reinforce it. Make sure it never failed again. But as the artifact's rhythms settled into something calmer, more complete, he realized that wasn't what needed. Permanence was what its creators had tried to force on it. That was why it had broken. This thing wasn't meant to endure unchanged. It was meant to continue. Calder reassembled the resonance frame one final time, not as a bridge, but as a tutor. He adjusted the feedback loops so the artifact could read itself, its own pulses, its own responses, without relying on his tools or his presence. You don't need me forever, Calder said quietly, fingers hovering over the controls. Just long enough to remember how to adapt. The artifact responded with a complex pattern, uncertain, recursive, questioning itself. Good, Calder thought. Questioning was healthy. He introduced control disruptions, minor frequency shifts, environmental noise, simulated interference. Each time, the artifact hesitated, then adjusted on its own. The pulses stumbled, corrected, and smoothed. Learning. A low hum spread through the soil as the artifact reconfigured internally. Its surface seemed shifted, sealing old fractures while opening new ones. Dynamic, flexible, alive in a way no machine should have been. Calder felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. He'd spent his life fixing abandoned things, then leaving before attachment could set in. This time felt different. This time, the thing he was restoring didn't want to be owned, moved, or even understood completely. It wanted autonomy. Above them, the distant survey drone made another pass, closer now. Time's up, Calder murmured. The artifact pulsed, steady, confident. It no longer needed his hands. Calder powered down the frame and stepped back. For the first time since he'd arrived, the artifact didn't reach for him. It held itself, and somehow that felt like success. Calder dismantled the last of his equipment as the sun climbed higher, the daylight turning harsh, and unforgiving. He worked quickly now, not out of panic, but out of respect. The artifact didn't need him hovering over it anymore. Hovering implied supervision. Control. This was something else. When the final stabilizer came loose, the ground beneath the artifact shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but with intention. Soil slid away from its base in smooth sheets, revealing more of its form. What Calder had thought was an oblong mass was only the upper portion of something far deeper. It wasn't buried. It had anchored itself. The artifact adjusted its posture, so to speak, redistributing weight and resonance through the plane itself. Calder's boots vibrated as the structure established equilibrium, sinking to planetary harmonics rather than fighting them. "You planned this," Calder whispered. The pulses changed again, not exploratory, not hesitant. Complete. For the first time since he'd arrived, the artifact stopped reacting. It simply was. Calder felt a strange emptiness where the connection had been. Not loss, completion. Like stepping back from structure you'd spent years repairing and realizing it could now stand without scaffolding. The sky flickered. The survey drone finally committed to a low pass, its sensors sweeping the plane in aggressive arcs. Calder held his breath. The drone passed overhead. Its systems registered nothing unusual. No anomaly, no signal, no object worth cataloging. The artifact had folded itself into the planet's background, not hidden, but contextualized. It existed in harmony rather than contrast. The drone veered away, satisfied. Calder exhaled slowly and laughed under his breath. "You clever thing." The artifact didn't respond. It didn't need to. For the first time in its long existence, it wasn't waiting anymore. And Calder realized something unsettling as he packed up his crawler and prepared to leave. The artifact hadn't been restored to serve the galaxy. It had been restored to survive it. Calder drove away at dawn the next day. Not because he was chased off, not because the artifact demanded it, but because staying would have meant watching it become something else, something shaped by expectation again. He stopped the crawler at the edge of the plane and looked back one last time. There was nothing to see. The red soil stretched unbroken to the horizon, wind carving familiar patterns across the surface. If Calder hadn't known better, he would have believed the artifact had never existed at all. And that was the point. As he reviewed his logs, Calder noticed something strange. The data he collected wasn't degrading, but it wasn't copying properly either. Files resisted duplication, compressing themselves into abstracted summaries rather than raw schematics. The artifact had altered the information, just enough to prevent misuse. Not secrecy, discernment. Calder smiled. Good call. He submitted a minimal report to the survey network. Anomaly resolved. Natural resonance formation. No actionable assets. It would bore anyone important. Days later, news feeds buzzed with headlines about missing relics, failed scans, and regions of space that no longer yielded exploitable mysteries. Analysts argued. Corporations complained. But no one traced it back to Virex's plane, because the artifact hadn't revealed knowledge. It had taught restraint. Calder felt it then, a faint echo in his instruments, not from behind him, but from far away. Other places, other abandoned things, resonating on similar frequencies. The artifact had begun listening again. Not calling, listening. Calder set a new course, heart steady, purpose renewed. He didn't know if he'd ever encounter it again, but he suspected the galaxy was about to become much harder to exploit and much harder to control. It didn't take long for attention to find him. Weeks after leaving Virex's plane, Calder noticed unusual traffic on the fringe of the star lanes. Small, sleek ships, unmarked, moving deliberately but cautiously. Nothing aggressive yet, but the pattern suggested interest. Someone, or something, had felt the artifact's pulse propagate beyond its immediate environment. Calder didn't panic. He had learned to listen before reacting, and now that skill became essential. He adjusted his trajectory, following the movement without revealing himself. It was faint, subtle, almost like the artifact was testing him, reminding him that vigilance was part of restoration, not just hands-on work. By nightfall, he tracked the lead vessel to an abandoned satellite array orbiting a gas giant. The craft had no weapons, no identifiers, only sensors clearly designed for observation. Calder crouched behind the hull of his crawler, scanning for anomalies in energy signatures. The vessel's systems weren't hostile, they didn't blink, didn't pulse aggressively. Yet Calder sensed a kind of expectation. Something was waiting for him to act. "All right," he whispered, fingers brushing against the empty toolkit beside him. "Let's see what curiosity looks like." He reached for the resonance tapper, adjusting frequencies slightly to match the artifact's recorded signals. The lead ship shivered in orbit, then emitted a low harmonic pulse, one that didn't try to communicate, only to acknowledge. A message, or a gesture, carried across light years without words. "We see it. We know it awakens." Calder exhaled slowly. "Then let's not disappoint." Somewhere beyond the satellites, the artifact pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't calling him back. It was informing the galaxy that something unusual had returned to the field. And the watchers above the gas giant had noticed. He wasn't alone anymore. Not entirely. And the real challenge was just beginning. The visitors stayed in orbit, observing but never approaching. Calder realized quickly that any sudden move could provoke them, and that brute force or overt signals would likely end the delicate balance he'd established with the artifact. Instead, he began experimenting with subtle resonance communication, using his tapper to modulate pulses and patterns that mirrored what he had learned from the artifact. The device hummed faintly, creating vibrations that could carry across long distances without revealing the exact location of the object. The lead ship responded, not with lights or sound, but with tiny adjustments in orbit and the modulation of energy fields Calder could barely measure. It was a conversation, but one that required patience and attention rather than words. Hours passed. Days. Calder learned to read their responses like a rhythm. Peaks and troughs of intent that revealed curiosity, caution, even moments of hesitation. The ships weren't aggressive. They weren't demanding. They were learning how to interact with something they hadn't understood in centuries. And the artifact pulsed in return, faint but persistent. It wasn't speaking to Calder directly this time. It was teaching him, guiding him on how to negotiate presence and influence without domination. Calder whispered to himself as he adjusted the tapper again. "It's teaching me now, not just surviving, but how to make them see reason." The night stretched on. Stars reflected faintly on the polished fractures of the artifact's surface. Calder realized that this object was more than a relic. It was a mediator, a bridge between civilizations and knowledge too fragile to assert itself by force. By sunrise, Calder had established the first fragile understanding, that intelligence could exist without control, and that sometimes restoration meant guiding others to recognize potential rather than seizing it. For the first time, he felt a responsibility far heavier than any repair job before. As Calder continued monitoring the artifact, new anomalies appeared. Small sensor readings in the outer fringe of nearby star systems flickered irregularly, signatures too brief and chaotic for conventional tracking. At first, he assumed these were unrelated probes or natural phenomena. But the artifact's pulses reacted instantly, subtly changing rhythm and intensity as though signaling recognition. That evening, as he ran diagnostics on his tapper and portable resonance frame, Calder noticed something chilling. The artifact's energy pattern contained traces of intelligence older than the galaxy maps accounted for, intentions encoded in the vibrations themselves. Whoever or whatever had created it had left behind fingerprints, warnings, and apparently a fail-safe. And now those fail-safes were stirring. Calder's scanner picked up a distant fleet-like movement, but unlike the observational vessels. These were fast, precise, and efficient, but faintly cloaked. They didn't scan, they were searching, not for him, but for the artifact. He clenched his jaw. "The galaxy never forgets," he muttered, "and neither does anyone who built you." The artifact pulsed, hesitant this time. It had not anticipated another intelligence reaching out after centuries of dormancy. It reacted almost instinctively, curling its subtle vibrations around Calder's instruments like a protective layer. Calder realized the stakes had changed. Restoration wasn't just about survival or learning anymore. It was about defending something that no one else could understand without destroying it. He glanced up at the faint horizon glow from the incoming fleet. "Looks like our quiet days are over," he said. "Time to see if we can really talk to ghosts." The fleet approached cautiously, their cloaks flickering against the red sky like whispers of movement. Calder crouched behind the crawler, heart pounding, hands poised over the tapper. Every instinct told him to hide, to flee, but he knew better. The artifact didn't survive through avoidance. It survived through engagement, through measured response. He calibrated the resonance frame, projecting patterns that mirrored the artifact's pulses. The vibrations traveled through the soil, faintly, subtly, just enough for the fleet's sensors to detect without revealing exact coordinates. A moment of silence stretched as the unknown vessels registered the signals. Then a subtle change in their formation, a slow, deliberate orbit adjustment, almost as if acknowledging presence. Calder exhaled. The artifact responded immediately, adjusting its own pulses to match theirs, creating a complex counterpoint of rhythm and intention. It was the first conversation without words. Calder realized the significance. The artifact wasn't a weapon, a database, or a tool. It was a bridge. If he failed to interpret it correctly, the approaching intelligence might misread its intent, possibly with catastrophic consequences. Hours passed. Each subtle adjustment, each pulse, was a test of patience and interpretation. Calder felt the weight of every decision, knowing the artifact's survival. And perhaps even the survival of the knowledge it preserved depended on his ability to translate, guide, and trust. Finally, the fleet paused. Their sensors flickered once more, and then they moved on, not leaving but retreating to observe. Calder watched them disappear into the distance, a mixture of relief and awe washing over him. The artifact pulsed slowly, almost contemplatively. Calder reached out instinctively. "You did it. We did it." They understand a little. And for the first time since he had touched it, the artifact seemed almost proud. The days that followed were quieter, but no less intense. Calder spent his time refining the resonance frame, experimenting with feedback loops and environmental harmonics. Every pulse the artifact sent now carried subtle information, patterns of growth, adaptation, and memory. It wasn't just alive in a mechanical sense. It was learning, evolving, and, in its own way, thinking. Calder realized something profound. He was no longer merely restoring the artifact. He was guiding its development. Every adjustment, every calibration, was shaping a mind that had waited centuries to awaken. The artifact responded in kind. Seams that had been static for centuries shifted gracefully, self-repairing and reshaping with elegance Calder had never anticipated. It began creating new structures within itself. Filaments of material that seemed to encode lessons, strategies, and histories in ways he could barely comprehend. It wasn't attempting to communicate directly. It didn't need words or pulses anymore. Calder could feel its intention, its reasoning, almost as though he had become part of its consciousness. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Calder looked over the artifact's surface. Shadows stretched across its fractured yet seamless hull. "You're more than I thought you'd ever be," he whispered. The artifact responded with a gentle rhythm, pulsing through the ground and air, a simple acknowledgement, yet one that resonated with depth. Calder realized that it was beginning to act independently, no longer reliant on his presence. Its purpose wasn't just survival, it was continuation. And for the first time, Calder understood that restoration wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about nurturing what could become greater than the sum of its parts. Above the plane, the wind stirred softly. The artifact pulsed again, steady and confident. Calder smiled, exhausted, exhilarated, and for the first time, certain that he had done something that would outlast him. Calder stood at the edge of Virex, playing one final time. The artifact behind him, now a monumental presence that seemed less like a machine and more like a sentinel. Its pulses were steady, self-sustaining, weaving subtly into the environment, merging with the soil, the air, and even the light. It no longer needed his guidance. It could persist on its own, shaping, listening, learning. He realized that this was the culmination of everything he had done in his life of restoration. Not to control, not to dominate, but to awaken potential where no one else could see it. The artifact was neither weapon nor tool. It was a guardian of understanding, an intelligence patiently preserving knowledge through resilience and adaptability. Above the horizon, faint signatures of the observing fleet appeared, but they hesitated, recognizing the artifact's autonomy and intent. Calder had created a precedent. Beings of advanced intelligence could exist in the galaxy without fear of exploitation or misunderstanding if given the chance. He packed his remaining equipment slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate equilibrium he and the artifact had achieved. For years, he had searched for abandoned, broken, or forgotten things to repair. This one wasn't just restored, it had transformed, in subtle ways, the very notion of what it meant to survive. As Calder prepared to leave the plane for the first time in weeks, the artifact pulsed once, low and deliberate. It wasn't a farewell, nor a thank you. It was a continuation, a promise that it would endure, and that its lessons of patience, restoration, and understanding would ripple outward, imperceptibly but inevitably, into a galaxy that often forgot to look beyond its own ambition. Calder climbed into his crawler, taking one last glance. The artifact, silently magnificent, waited, watching, learning. And for the first time, he understood. Sometimes, the most powerful legacy isn't action, conquest, or control. It's restoration, patience, and the quiet influence of something that refuses to be forgotten. As the sun rose over the plain, Calder whispered to himself, "Not all treasures are meant to be taken. Some are meant to awaken." The artifact pulsed once more, steady, enduring. And then it simply was waiting for the next patient human to find it and understand its quiet, immeasurable power.